Czar of Homelessness. Is that the official title?
No, we'll go with that.
Okay, all right. And I know Mark very well, and I think very highly of his work, and I'm super excited to hear what he has to say today. So he's going to talk for a couple of minutes, and then if you have questions, like, ask him. He is the guy to ask questions about the homelessness, population issues, whatever, in Houston. So, you good?
I'm good.
All right. So, Mark, I can talk.
Thank you very much to Jeff for inviting me. I'm sorry for being late. As Jesse can tell you, at City Hall, there's all these impromptu last-minute meetings that you get pulled into that unfortunately caused me to be late. I'm going to speak very, very fast, so I apologize for how fast I'm about to speak. But there's so much information that I want to try to get out. I know I will not be able to get, even scintilla shred of it out. And so I'm just going to, whenever the 5 minutes is up, just let me know. I'm going to stop wherever I'm at because I really want to end up having a discussion. But the reality is, in the city of Houston, we are doing more in this city to reduce homelessness than anywhere else in the nation, and we have been successful. We have reduced homelessness more than any other city in the nation. We've housed more homeless individuals in the past 6 years than any other city in the nation. 11,000 individuals placed into permanent housing in the past 6 years. And I'm going to even refrain, since 2012. So that is in the past 5 years. But that equals about a 60% reduction in our homeless population in the past 6 years. So I'm going to go into especially what we're doing, what we're using for solutions, and also how we use data and how we use technology in what we do. The first thing is that we know what our population is because we do a count every year. The technical term is a point-in-time enumeration. But people just call it a homeless count or homeless census. We're the only city in the nation that spends 3 days doing it and not one. We actually had to get an exemption from HUD to allow us to do that. That allows us more time to go into the bayous, to the woods, to go and make sure that we get everybody. Additionally, we do more than just a count. We're the only jurisdiction in the nation that also does a survey. So we are out there with tablets. We are geolocating where we're talking to the individual, which does not mean that's necessarily where they're staying at night if they are an unsheltered homeless individual. But we ask those questions. Where do you stay at night? We are going through a 20-minute survey with these individuals, and we're getting real-time data from that. And then all that data, along with data we're collecting at our shelters, gets all taken over, and a demographer at University of Texas takes all that information, makes sure there's no duplicates and so forth, goes through the mess to make some beautiful data from it, some beautiful information, so we know how to better respond. But it's a good way of seeing what it is after year after year after year. So for instance, any given night in 2011, there was over 8,500 homeless individuals on Earth in Houston. Now that number is down to 3,400. So that is a 200-person drop in just 1 year, which you might sound like, 200. You have to put that into context. That's the biggest drop in the state of Texas. So far surpasses Dallas, far surpasses Austin and San Antonio. 200 individuals is sizable, especially as our number keeps on going down and down. Out of that number of 3,400, we divide it into people who are sheltered and who are unsheltered. Individuals that are sheltered are in shelter or transitional housing, and nearly 2/3 of our homeless population on any given night is in shelter. Only 1/3 is still unsheltered, or what we call on the streets. Okay? Out of that, those people are spread all across this region. We don't only count, we count the entire region. So the city of Houston, it's Harris County, it's Fort Bend County, it's Montgomery County. And outside of this, we use something called HMIS, which stands for Homeless Management Information System. Any jurisdiction that receives federal funds has to have this database. And every organization that uses governmental funds has to keep a running tab of who they serve using this database. So if I'm a homeless individual and I go to a soup kitchen, I'm being clocked in through HMIS. If I'm going to healthcare for the homeless, I'm getting clocked in. If I'm staying at the shelter, I'm getting clocked in. If I'm going to Beacon Day Shelter, I'm getting clocked in. If an outreach worker is talking to me on the street, they're clocking me in. And from this, we know that now we're down to around 19,000 1,000 individuals over a course of a year access the homeless system. So these are two different numbers. We have one number in the whole course of the year, number of unique individuals accessing the homeless system, and then you have actually how many people on a given night is homeless in Houston. Two different numbers because the population is constantly changing. There are people exiting out of homelessness and people entering homelessness constantly. So what we figured out is in the past, there was no method to the madness. And it was what we were doing was we were managing individuals' needs. And often we were managing the symptoms of being homeless. Oh, you're hungry? Okay, let me work on getting you food. Oh, you need some clothes? Let me work on getting you clothes. But the reality is we weren't solving anything. We were just putting Band-Aids on systematic issues that have been there forever. We did a big change from managing issues to solving issues. And so now we are focused on permanently solving the issue of homelessness. And what we use as a solution is housing. This is a simple idea, that the person is homeless because they are without a house. Thus, if you put them into a house, they are no longer homeless. And how housing used to work in the past would be like, I got housing for you, or I got short-term housing, or temporary housing, or transitional housing, but you need to stop drinking, or you need to stop smoking, or you need to go to these 3 classes before. And that sounds fine and dandy to a lot of people. Geez, if I'm going to pay for this person's housing, I should be able to ask for a couple measly things in return. But the reality is we're not talking about normal people. We're talking about highly vulnerable individuals with issues. And so to that person who's already been on the streets for 4 years, saying, I got housing for you, but you gotta stop smoking, screw that. I'm just gonna continue being on the streets. And so that is why we've adopted a strategy called Housing First. And Housing First is the data-proven strategy throughout the nation that most jurisdictions are now jumping on board with. It also talks about the issue of shelter. The reality is the people, most of the people that are still in the streets today do not want to go to shelter. People might have 103 different reasons why they not want to go to shelter. If we solve all those reasons, there will be 104. And it ranges from they're too crowded to it reminds me of a jail to the number one thing is there's structure. I got to be in by 6 o'clock. I got to wake up for breakfast at 7. You know, when I get in, I have to take a shower. And they do this for obvious reasons. Or they make me change my clothes for obvious reasons. There's been issues in the past, bed bugs and so forth. And so even though it works for the majority of our homeless, 2/3 of our homeless, those remaining on the streets, it's not as simple as an idea of just more shelter that will do it. So Housing First says the very first thing we're going to do is put that person into housing. Then we are going to offer them supportive services on their own volition, on their own taking. We're not going to force, we're not going to require. Those are barriers. But what we find is once you place somebody in safe and stable housing, the vast majority of them all take us up on those offers of supportive services. So I think a great example is I'm excited because in Houston we're going to be opening up our first, this is a very small pilot, 15 beds for chronically homeless inebriates. Yeah. Seattle did this with a community called East Lake. In East Lake, they placed 80 of their most chronically homeless inebriates in there. And without requiring them to stop drinking, without requiring them to go into counseling or anything. But they offered it, but they didn't require it. In the first year, the amount of drinking was reduced by 1/3, 30% in 1 year. The number of visits to the sobering center was cut by over 80% for these individuals. I mean, we're talking about thousands of visits. The whole concept is that we're not trying to fix this person. Well, we'd love to offer. But at the end of the day, we're triaging. We're just going to say, if this person's going to drink and if the person's going to pass out, at least do it in a safe environment where it's not impacting themselves as much, not impacting everybody else around them. And this can be controversial, but it's being seen as best practices. But at the end of the day, I equate it to, as a kid, I'm about to clean up my room. And my mom comes up, bangs on my door and says, Mark, clean up your room. I'm like, I'm not doing it anymore. I was about to, but you didn't have to tell me. And now that you told me, I'm not going to. And you find that a lot today. So it's all about, our system now is all about letting it be individual choice, because we found it's much more successful when it is individual choice. Not only do people end up taking the services more, but actually they're much more receptive to the services that are offered if they believe that it's their own volition and they're not being forced. Also, we focus on data-driven practices only. So folks will say, oh, my organization does the best work, and we do this type of housing. And my organization does this, and we do the best thing. And it's all like, okay, if it's so great, show me the data. We want to do it. We have a limited amount of resources to deal with this issue. And we want to invest it where we're going to get the biggest rate of return, where it's going to be most successful. And we have to have data to back that up. That's not anecdotal, but it's actually based on data. And then we started operating as a system. I don't really like to use the word collaboration, because collaboration is a loaded term. So I could go to one organization and say, hey, are you collaborating with others? And they'll be like, yeah. I go to lunch with the executive director of that organization once, every month. And we do a clothing drive in the holiday season. Okay. That's, to us, not collaboration. Collaboration is really your day-to-day operations being intertwined, where you're combining resources, you're combining efforts to maximize the impact. And so instead of calling it collaboration, we call it collective impact. And so we are now no longer operating as just organizations, or operating as an alliance, or as a network, or even as a coalition. We are operating as a system. So we went through that system. We said, where do we have gaps? Where do we have duplicity? Let's take the duplicity and fill in the gaps. We said, we're going to create an entire continuum of care, which means from entry to exit. That means from the shelter to triaging, or from the streets to the shelters, to the programs, to the permanent housing, to the employment, and then off to a life of self-sufficiency for individuals that can do that. So we have over 100 different organizations that are all now working together. The initiative is called The Way Home. The city is one of the partners. We like to consider ourselves one of the chief stakeholders. But the reality is that this does not live within the city government. This is its own initiative called The Way Home with 100 different partners that are all part of it. We've now brought all of our funding streams in line. So funding that comes to the city, there's a biggest flood of government goes right to another organization called our Continuum of Care, which is kind of a consortium of local homeless providers. So if we're doing state money, if we're doing federal money through the city, federal money through the Continuum of Care, federal money, or money even from the Houston Endowment, it all goes to this one initiative. So if you want any of these funds, you have to be on board with this initiative so that we are always working together and collaborating. For those who are chronically homeless, which are the most vulnerable, these are federal definition of individuals who have spent 12 months out of 36 living on the street and have a disability, be substance abuse, mental health, or physical. For those are our most vulnerable individuals. Those are our high-cost utilizers. Those are our frequent flyers, if you want to use that term. For those individuals, that's who are really focused on housing. The intervention is called permanent supportive housing. It is permanent housing. People say, oh, so, why permanent? Don't you want them to live a life of self-sufficiency? Yes, that's our goal. But we're not naive to the fact that for these individuals, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, the majority of them are never going to be able to be self-sufficient. And that's okay. We will continue paying for their housing and their supportive services. It's cheaper to do that than have them on the streets, where it's very expensive. Emergency room costs, police costs, jail costs, shelter costs, cleaning up the streets. We're looking at, you're spending anywhere from $40,000 to $30,000 to $50,000 per person. We can cut those costs up to 70% by just housing them. It is less expensive to house the individual than to step over them on the streets. And so that's why we're so focused on that. It's not only housing, but it's also supportive services. They'll have case managers, and the case managers tailor the supportive services to meet that individual's needs. We use rapid rehousing for families and youth. And what rapid rehousing is, think of as a short-term rental assistance. And as the rental assistance goes down, their self-responsibility goes up. They're actually signing a lease themselves. It's in their name. And then they have a case manager who works with them on the budget and works with them on getting a job and makes sure that they're not both cut off cold turkey, but it's a process. We have now just implemented something called Income Now, So when an individual gets assessed for housing, they're now getting assessed for income. This is exciting because I didn't talk about the assessment. It's really exciting. I can feel the excitement in the room. So if a homeless individual goes into Salvation Army, located right here, right a couple blocks away, they go to Star of Hope, they go to the Beacon, there is something we call coordinated access. That is our homeless housing system. And we have trained professionals, which we call housing assessors, and they go on using a web-based program, and they will assess this individual. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes. Every organization in the past who's helping the homeless, they had their own assessment tool. And it created a data nightmare because there's no way to really compare apples to apples anywhere. And so now what we've done is we've standardized the assessment tool that all 100 organizations use. So these assessors use this real-time web-based program to assess the individual. At the end, it will say what's the right type of intervention for them. It will place them on the list. We house individuals by vulnerability, not by visibleness. So a lot of people say, well, I keep on seeing this person on the streets. You guys aren't doing anything. The first question is, are they really homeless or not? And if they are really homeless, then the question comes into, have they been assessed for housing? And if they've been assessed for housing, then it ends up being a question about vulnerability. So I have to have conversations with homeless people all the time who say, I was assessed a year ago and you guys haven't done anything. And I have to say, some good news and bad news. The bad news is we're not there for you right now with the housing. The good news is, no matter how difficult life is for you, it's better than most other homeless individuals out there. And those individuals keep on jumping you on the list because they're more vulnerable. And that vulnerability, we are asking how many times people have been to the emergency rooms, or what psychological issues they might have, what physical ailments they might have, how many days, if they were a victim of domestic violence. I mean, it's a very complex assessment tool that we are constantly changing and modifying and adapting. So we use this. Now, when they get assessed, they're getting assessed for income. When it came to employment in the past, the issue was we were underneath this fallacy that a homeless individual is inherently damaged goods, and they have to be trained to work again. And they lack the social skills to have employment, and they're not going to be able to keep their job, and they're not going to be able to be productive citizens. The reality is that's not true. The secret to getting employment for homeless individuals is getting them a job immediately that fits their skill level. So in the past, yes, you do have to train a homeless individual up if you're putting them in a position that requires more skills than they have at the time. And so, yes, there's lots of homeless that were not keeping their jobs. But the reason is we were setting them up to fail. We were putting them into jobs that they did not have the skills for. The vast majority of homeless individuals out there are not chronic. Chronic individuals represent a quarter of our population. They just use up 75% of our resources, our homeless resources. That's why we're so transfixed on the chronic population. But outside of the chronic population, those that are non-chronic, 70% of them are homeless for 2 months or less. Another way you can think of it is they self-resolve their homelessness within 2 months. So what our intent is to reduce that 2 months as much as possible, to make it as short as possible. And we can reduce that by connecting them to income as quickly as possible. So now we have a program with Texas Workforce Solutions where they have specially trained employment coaches who are just trained to deal with the homeless and ultra vulnerable. And now we assess them for that income, and they get a real-time appointment to meet with that trainer, with that employment coach, usually the next day, definitely that week. They go meet with them. We have gotten 500 homeless individuals jobs since January of last year. That number might seem, maybe it could be higher, but it's one of the highest numbers in the nation when you're dealing with getting very vulnerable individuals employed. And so that's what we're doing with that. So when you look around it, housing is the main focus. You cannot build enough shelters to reduce the problem. Shelters are a Band-Aid. Shelters are meant for people to be there a couple weeks, a couple months. We were putting people in shelters for years. Additionally, you want people to rotate out of shelters. That one shelter that maybe one individual stayed at in an entire year, If you could get that individual housed and out of that shelter bed, that one shelter bed could service 40 people in the course of a year. But it was being taken up by that one individual who didn't have any options. There was no continuum of care if that housing wasn't there. So we're working on the housing piece. We use permanent supportive housing for chronics. We use rapid rehousing for families and for victims of domestic violence and for youth. And then we use income for everybody else. We use technology in our assessment tools. We use technology in our counts. We use technology in our homeless management information system. We know where the issue is not knowing where the homeless are. We know where they're at. The issue is getting together enough of the resources. We needed 4,000 home units just for our chronic population in 2012. We figured that out. We had around 2,500 units. We needed to create them 1,500 units. We create units twofold. We might build them brick sticks up. If you ever have a chance, there's an organization called New Hope Housing here in Houston. Check it out. They have one in Acres Homes, Rittenhouse. They have Sapowitz in the 5th Ward. If you've ever been to El Tiempo or Ninfos off of Navigation, there's like a 2-story building behind El Tiempo. That's actually housing for the homeless. That's New Hope Housing. They're building a new one farther down on Navigation as well. If you're driving to Hobby Airport on 45 South, and there's this building on the left, if you're driving to the airport, and it has this metal punch art as a fence, a big fence, and it's punched, and there's some folk dancing and stuff in that. It's bright orange. You'll see it next time. That's actually homeless housing. But we cannot build enough housing, so we go out to the regular market. And this is the most difficult part, is we will pay for that housing. We just have to get landlords to be willing to rent to our clients. And you're dealing with vulnerable individuals with kind of some shoddy background. They might have some broken leases. They might have an eviction. They might even have a record. And so we have to go and talk to the landlords and say, yeah, they have a felony. There's for non-aggressive felony. He was 8 years old. They haven't had any run-in with the law since then. Can you, would you be willing to house this individual? We'll pay for it. You got to be willing to provide that unit. That takes hundreds and hundreds of man-hours per person, and that's where there's a big kink in there. And I will say that being able to house the homeless is under assault by the federal government right now. The mayor has made this a main point. He's talked about it in a State of the City address. We used low-income housing vouchers, which lots of people call Section 8. It's primarily used for people who are indigent and low income. But we also really use it for the homeless. This is the way we pay for a homeless individual to be placed into housing. Without that, we can't get them. And that was basically cut to a level to where that means we wouldn't be able to issue any new vouchers. We use vouchers to house 75% of our chronics that we're housing are housed using vouchers. So if we don't have new vouchers, that means that it could be up to a 75% decrease. The mayor's going to be plugging that hole in using some other funds so that we can achieve the mayor's goal of housing 500 chronically homeless individuals in roughly 6 months. That's been delayed because of the funding issue. But we're under constant peril right now. The city only puts in less than $100,000 of its general funds into homelessness a year. That's it. So locally, very few dollars. We sometimes use some TERS money. We sometimes use some affordable housing and homeless bond funds. But from the general revenue, very, very little. If you go to a place like Seattle, they're putting $13 million plus, $60 million sometimes. And we don't do that. We find other creative ways. Most of the funds we use are federal funds, and it is very, very important. So I'm going to shut up because I know I've talked way more than 5 minutes, and I know you probably have some questions. Yes, sir.
2 questions. First, when you do the surveys, do you see if they have access to a cell phone?
We do ask. We do ask if they have cell
What's
phones.
that number?
I would say the vast majority of homeless do have cell phones.
Okay.
The question is if they actually have minutes on it, and then if they have a data plan. So there was something started under Reagan where they would provide landlines for low-income individuals. Under Bush, that got changed to cell phones, including cell phones. For some reason, people call it Obama phones. But it's no win. So individuals, and you might see them, there's little canopies of people giving out these phones in certain neighborhoods. You get the phone and it does come with some minutes. And the reason why they're so nice to give you that phone because they want you to buy the minutes once those are out. I find that most individuals, so they all have cell phones. It's a matter of catching them when it's active and they have those minutes. If not, I do find that the homeless population is very well informed to what services are out there for them. They know better than actually I do. It's a very tight-knit community. Word travels faster and lightning. Additionally, they have their own portals and their own websites and all that, where they keep track of everything that's out there. So I allow them to go to libraries and so forth for access to the internet.
And then also, what was the rationale behind banning public encampments before there was a solution in place to house the 3,000 people?
So so out of the 3,000, remember there's only 1,000 roughly that is unsheltered on the streets. Out of that, a very, very small number of those individuals are actually living in encampments.
Okay.
Tents are a relatively new phenomenon. If you were to go in last October to these areas, you would not have seen tents. Some well-meaning individuals went out in the 2 cold days we had over the winter and gave out tents.
Awesome.
And so the rationale is that it's ultimately a public safety issue of issues of rapes, the issues of drug issues, but it really comes down to rapes and bodily harm that's done in the confines of these tents on public property that you can't see. These
Clear tents.
Right, there you go. And I'll say, tents can sometimes make it difficult for our outreach teams to do their jobs. We're trying to entice people off, but if somebody feels that they can get all their needs met on the streets, it makes it very difficult for our outreach teams to have that sway and have that ability to work on getting them off the streets. And it can create a sense of permanency where they might not have had that before. I'm saying that, but at the end of the day, the housing has always been, even those shelters that are full, they're making special arrangements with us where if we find somebody who wants to get off the streets and go to shelters, that we are able to get them into shelters. Thus far, we've not had one person willing to go to shelter that we were not able to get in. And we're continuing to work on that. My main thing is I wanted to make sure that it did not come to surprise to any homeless individuals, and they knew that there was all this assistance out there. And that's what I've been working on. I really don't work on the enforcement side as much, but we really wanted to make sure that it was as low impact as possible. Yes, ma'am.
I'm working on this project, Section 8 housing, and it's becoming increasingly more apparent that one of the biggest problems is incentivizing landlords to accept these tenants. Apparently, the voucher list is very long. The wait list is incredible, like up to 5 years. Is it possible? Can we do like a policy where we can like incentivize them to? Okay, landlords don't want bad tenants. All right. From my research, it seems like a lot of tenants they don't want to dig themselves a hole and then not be able to get rid of these tenants. That makes sense. I'm being very PC about this, but it seems like there's like a problem with getting stuck with a bad tenant and not being able to get rid of them. Now, can that be solved with like better documentation with a tenant instead of going up to them and convincing them, hey, can you please accept this one specific candidate? Can it be like a history record of them? Can it be like an electronic version of documentation of like this person's history? Or maybe if there was another incentive, landlords need to do small repairs. Can we do like, if you accept this percentage of tenants, we will pay for like certain repairs that you need to have done?
So we've looked at lots of different types of incentives.
Okay.
And it can span from everything from, so this is it. These landlords are taking what they call high-risk individuals. And because of that, they're charging, you or I might pay 1 month's security deposit, they're charging 2 months security deposit. Or they're charging on top of that a risk fee that's illegal for them to charge. And we can't spend federal dollars on this. So we've been working, that's what the Meaningful Change campaign is, to get Houstonians to give to what we call our Barrier Buster Fund. Because these are barriers to getting folks housed. We've looked at perhaps instead of giving out these thousands of dollars everywhere for security deposits that maybe we have kind of like our own type of insurance bank, to where if you take one of our folks and anything happens, you know that we have this big fund set up, and you can come and dip into this fund to make those improvements, to do what, to overcome any issues you have. You have so I know this just because I used to work in the housing and community development department. So they think there, if we get these, we go with them with all this documentation that you talk about. And with all this documentation, some of that, it actually hurts sometimes more than it actually helps. Because these individuals either don't have records or they do have records and they're not good. And they want to get paid. And they know if they have to evict the individual, that can take away that entire security deposit, the cost of just eviction, let alone any damage that's done to the apartment. And so we have looked at places like Austin that gives them an extra $1,000. We're at 90%. We're at 10%, 90%. Oh, was it not vacancy? We're at, help me here. Occupancy, 90%. Thank you. It's very technical. But there's places like Seattle and San Francisco that are 99. And so, you try to give some financial incentives. You try to offer them, letting them know, trying to take the risk away from them as much as possible. But it's just not the end all. It's very difficult, especially when there's not a huge need. And so one of the biggest ways we pull at it is we say, hey, we have a lower eviction rate than the general population. If you run into issues, you don't have to deal with the client, your tenant themselves. You just talk to the case manager, and the case manager will handle it for you. And we also say, hey, and also it's guaranteed rent, at least for permanent supportive housing. If you got 10 units, you're going to get paid for all 10 units with utilities in one check every single month. You don't have to worry about it. But we've run into some problems with our rapid rehousing clients, to where they have to contribute up to 30%. It's capped at 30% of their income. We will contribute the rest, but 30% of their income per federal government has to go towards housing. And we run into issues with people who won't even do that. And so we pay in their funding. We put our money in. They never put in their 30%, and now they're being evicted because of that. And they were warned 100 times. And the case manager tried working with them, but they still couldn't even muster that. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any programs in place to keep people from relapsing into homelessness who are already housed and could potentially fix that issue?
So if I showed you how we track it, there would be a sheet, and it would just be labeled, let's say, permanent supportive housing. And it might show 40 different programs that we have in permanent supportive housing. And it's going to show you the number of people that entered that program and the number of people that exited that program. Now, an exit doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, because then we go to a different set of columns, and it's going to be having whether it's a positive exit or a negative exit. It is a positive exit if they never touch the system again. It is a negative exit if they end up touching the system again. We don't like to see people who are housed falling back into the homeless system. But that's how we know that out of the 11,000 people we've housed, 90% of them did not fall back into homelessness. That is huge. Rates of 30% used to be big. Permanent supportive housing had a national average of 86% success rate of being housed a year later. In Houston, we were at around 92% a year later, still even being housed. We can also see individuals, and we have a big need. So this is what I'm constantly telling folks, hey, you want to help? To organizations and to churches. They're homeless individuals, formerly homeless individuals who are housed, still have needs. They got social needs, they got food needs. And we need the public's help with that. So whether it's doing a bingo night at one of our housing communities, whether it's doing a cooking demonstration, whether it's celebrating people's birthdays, that's what keeps them. If all I knew was going to at a corner and hanging out all day long, even though I'm housed, I might still do that if that's all I did for the past 10 years. And so we need to provide for those social needs. So for instance, if Jane is formerly homeless and housed, and Jane now keeps on going back to our day shelter or to a soup kitchen, we will put a little flag on her record, and then her case manager will know that, hey, Jane is still going. So the case manager will go, hey, why are you still going to the beacon? Is everything all right? What's going on? And we can try to intervene that way and try to see what the needs are. Or somebody might stop showing up. Somebody might not be in their house anymore. We can't find this person. And then we can put a flag on the record. We can be notified next time that person checks into the system. That case manager can know. So we found out this one woman was not in her housing anymore, found her at a shelter. Case manager goes, "What's the deal?" And she's like, "Somebody bumped into me in the hallway, and I didn't like the way they looked at me. I don't think they like me, and they don't want me." Okay. And this case manager worked with the property manager, and the woman came back, and the property manager, "So sorry, it was probably nothing, it was probably an accident. How about I just move you a room? Would that be okay for you?" And the woman was like, "Okay." But she just hadn't been used to it. It was probably nothing. But to her, she's very sensitive, but it meant enough to her to put her back into the system and not stay housed. And using HMIS, we were able to track that and find that out. Yes, sir.
What role does geographic relocation play in the homeless population moving from city to city?
Very little for Houston. Can't talk about other cities. But in the last survey we did, over 80% of the folks were from the Houston area. So people are like, "Oh, you're housing the folks, and you're housing the big numbers. Oh, we don't want, now you're just putting up a sign for all the homeless to come to Houston." And no, that's not the reality. The data does not show that that's an issue. Yes, sir.
How much effort or insight is given to preventing homelessness?
Prevention is something we want to do more of. So one thing we did is that we had all these different buckets. We had buckets for prevention, we had buckets for families, and a bucket for youth, and we had a bucket for chronics, and we had a bucket for vets, and all these things. And because we wanted to make everybody happy, we took a little bit of money into every little bucket. But at the end of the day, we didn't achieve anything. So one thing we've done is, what we've been able to do is we've done because we have concentrated our resources. We've targeted pre-existing resources and using it in a concentrated fashion so that we can maximize that impact and start seeing gains. The big reason is because in the past, there used to be anecdotal stories of success. How are we doing on homelessness? Every organization had this great anecdotal story. But the reality is that when we looked at the number was going up. So we said, we're done with anecdotal success. We want to actually move the needle. And that's what really propelled this change. So when it gets to prevention, we definitely want to do more. The way we look at it is once we can take care of veteran homelessness, then that frees up funds to deal with chronics. And once we can take care of chronics, then that frees up resources to deal with non-chronics. And then once we deal with that, and you go up, and then finally we'll have enough resources to really target it and go towards prevention. But prevention is key, especially when you look at, here's some numbers I'll rattle off real quick. Our numbers for youth is a little bit lower. We're at, I believe around, our numbers for youth are well below the national average. I'm sorry, I'm just going blank now. Nationally, out of the youth, 40% of the youth are LGBTQ for reasons of being kicked out of the house or not feeling supported. In Houston, LGBTQ represents about 25% of our youth population, a little bit lower. We were fortunate to be a part of a national pilot, which is a federal initiative called the NEST program, one of only 2 jurisdictions chosen to do it, and we've been working on that. Prevention is on the list, and hopefully we'll have those resources to go there more often. The key is also really focusing on people who are also literally homeless. So you get people all the time who say, "I'm homeless," but then be like, "Yeah, but you got family you can go live with." Or you got push folks. You have low-income folks who might be accessing the service. It's a shame to where housed individuals who might be low-income are accessing the homeless system to get their basic needs met. And this is why we need to do a better job of making sure the homeless system is just for those that are literally homeless, but those who are still struggling, who might be facing housing instability and their needs, has a system where they can get their needs met as well.
How's the case managers load, and can we make their workflow easier with technology?
You probably can, and I would probably be the first person to say I'm not the best one to speak on the intricacies of that. We're working on bringing down the caseload more, lowering the caseload, because it's tough. We have different types of case managers out there. We have case managers for rapid housing. We have case managers for permanent supportive housing. Their caseloads, and then we have case managers for those that are vets. and their caseloads can differ. Certainly, I know it can help, and there's some probably low-hanging fruit with that, and that's a good idea to brainstorm further. Okay, I'm gonna get you. I'm not ignoring you. Let me get these two ladies real quick, and then yes, yes, ma'am.
So in the one story you just told about that one lady that had an incident that you heard about, was there any like platform that she could have like reached to her caseworker?
Oh, for sure, for
Because
sure.
she just didn't.
Yeah, all these individuals are given a whole laundry list of contact numbers if they need help, and they usually know what organization the case manager is stationed out of. Most of these organizations are centrally located right around where the services are. But you're dealing with vulnerable individuals that to you it might seem sometimes very logical, but to individuals who are struggling, it's kind of convoluted sometimes.
Would it be a number that she had to call, or it would be something to text?
Oh, she could have, she went into the Beacon. She could have talked to the people right at the front desk of the Beacon. She could have texted her case manager. She could have called her case manager. She could have called the main line. And these are things that are all given to folks. But I see where you're going with it. Yes, ma'am.
How many people now on the waiting list today? And how long the range? And what's the plan that for you that you have to reduce that time?
So, right, we're really focused on chronics,
Okay.
okay? And with chronics, I'll have to look at the wait list, but I think it's around 300 right now. But additionally, there might be some people who we've not assessed. And while we wait, people are turning chronic. And so that's why when we're saying we're going to house 500, that's well, you only said you only have 300, so why 500? And that's because we want to make sure to get all the chronics and all those people that do become chronic. For those who are non-chronic singles, the reality is we're never going to have enough housing for them. I'm just going to be frank with you. And that's why we're using as the intervention for them employment. But we have looked at the data, and there's about 30% of our non-chronics this has come from. So if 70% of our non-chronics homelessness is less than 2 months, then that leaves us 30%. And that 30% usually does need some type of housing to help them. It might not need the type of really high-level supportive services that permanent supportive housing provides for chronics, but they need something similar to that. We don't have that housing for them right now. It comes down to a financial issue, and we're still looking and hoping to be able to do that, but it's something we don't have. Listen, there's needs all over the place. I can tell you stories of certain individuals that they can't take their own medicine. They can't. They gotta be reminded, you better physically hand it to them or they're not gonna take it. Or people that it's hard for them to get in and out of their wheelchair. So these are individuals that we almost need type of assisted living care for them, and we don't have that. We don't, and that's nothing like, oh, we don't have, and It's something that we're continuously looking for and working on, but it is a need that we currently have. All right. Oh, yes. Sorry.
How long the time?
Oh, it can range. It can range from usually our goal is to get it to everybody being housed within a month. We're still far away from that. There are some people who have sat on the list for over a year, but that's because they're way down at the bottom of the list. And then once we find that person, we have to reassess them because the federal government says that the information has to be recent. And then we have to spend time on getting their documents together. So we have to have proof of income. We have to do disability verification. We have to do homeless verification. We have to verify that they're legitimately homeless. And so once you do all these different types of things, we got to get their birth certificates. We got to get IDs. We got to get all that. And then so that they can actually end up signing that lease. And then we got to find that unit. So that is usually what's taking up the most of that chunk of time. We've had people in a month. Most people we do under 2 months, but it's been longer than that.
So is that collection done digitally, or?
We now do upload all that onto HMIS. So done on purpose. Because let me tell you, people are losing or getting their stuff stolen all the time on the streets. So individuals are going through IDs like they're candy. And it's difficult because they end up going to organizations that will provide half of the expense of getting an ID. And then they'll go to another organization that'll provide the other half, but it is costly every single time that they go get an ID. We have organizations that just work on them. Operation ID is one of those. But now Operation ID is really focusing on individuals who are getting housed. So instead of us just providing ID for everybody, they're really focused on providing those IDs where it's going to make a difference, a meaningful change of getting those people off the streets. All right.
Yeah, one person transparent tent is $20 on Alibaba, throwing a pillow and sleeping bag with $30. So $30K for that. I'll set up like a crowdfunding campaign if you guys want to use things. They won't have privacy, but they'll have the rain gold.
Gotcha. So at the end of the day, we love people to go to shelters. That's where, at the end of the day, we want to house everybody. But in the meantime, shelters is the place, and that's where we go.
Sure, but
by
there's
giving-
still people on the street.
And listen, I'm not elected. I didn't craft. I didn't vote for any of the ordinances.
Pay your boss.
But I will tell my boss. But what I can talk about is what we're doing for the
Yeah,
folks.
it's wonderful.
And I can tell you that giving a mattress or a sleeping bag to somebody on the streets is only it's not helping. You are managing their issues, but you're
Right,
not
but
helping.
the solution isn't going to be done for another 6 months. The way back home thing is in
But I'm
2 months.
good. But I will tell you, we need the community's help on the way home. I will say, unfortunately, folks look at it. Well, that's your problem. That's your issue. We're going to let the government do that, or these 100 organizations. But really, what is holding us back, what's taking those 6 months, or what's helping is that a lack of housing and having those housing abilities, those housing units, as well as the funds to get those people, off the streets for good. So whether you're for or against it, and I understand.
No, I'm totally for the ban on panhandling and cooking utensils because it's a fire hazard. Panhandling, you don't necessarily know if people are homeless, you're just taking advantage of other people. It's great. The shelter thing bugs me. Your point about the rapes and the drug use is great. However,
Hey, listen, I understand. And I am proud that, the city of Houston remains the only major city in Texas where it is still illegal to sleep outside. Wait in the back, and then Jeff.
I was just wondering, how close are y'all working with mental health experts?
We were pretty close, but we could do a lot more. So the reality is that because we've housed most of our chronics, those that are left who are chronically homeless are very, very difficult cases. And the reality is that Housing First is a great intervention for individuals suffering from mental health. You put them into housing as the very first thing, and then you offer them mental health services. And we do that, and we work with FQH, Federally Qualified Health Service Centers. We work with a bunch of different mental health providers, but the reality is we could do a lot more. Additionally, it's very difficult for individuals who are suffering from mental health to where they can't even make the rational decision to voluntarily get off the streets. And so the only way you can forcibly get somebody off the streets is if they're threatening themselves, the health of themselves, which is suicide. They're threatening physical and bodily harm on somebody in the public, or if there's something called decomposition. It's kind of subjective, and most police believe that you will literally have to be lying in your own feces for it to fall down to a level of decomposition. But if you just go downtown on a sunny day in the summer and you see a guy wearing 3 jackets and a sleeping bag over his head in 95-degree weather, obviously something is not right. But it doesn't rise to a level to, even if we offer this person and help them. And that's why it takes consistent outreach by professionals. So it might be the 50th time that we say, are you ready to be housed? That person says yes. We do run into a smaller population that really needs to be stabilized before we can even house them. And it's difficult finding those tools, and it's difficult even finding those resources. We know when people are taken into the psychiatric triage emergency facility that, as soon as they're stabilized, they're out the door. We have recently set up a call-in center out of the city's Housing and Community Development Department. And this is to allow the jails, the prisons, and the hospitals, if they have somebody who's homeless, to call up and have them assessed for income and housing before they are released out the door. We call them as a point of contact. And we have different points of contacts. And that's one of them, and that's what we use. For individuals who don't come into the system, we use our outreach teams, and they go out and they bring the system to those on the streets. And people say all the time, we just need more outreach. If only we had more outreach. The reality is what good is outreach if they don't have the resources to offer? We can do all the outreach we want, but if they don't have the housing and the services for those folks, it's not going to be effective. And at the end of the day, we cannot force people off the streets. People think that we have this magic ability to force people to take things, and we don't. But we work with it, we work with it, and we work with it. And it takes professionally trained individuals who know how to deal with people with schizophrenia, or know how to deal with people who are vulnerable to do this. It is a romantic notion to think that this person is on the street because I have not talked to him. I know I have what it takes to convince this person to get help, and I bet I can do it. But the reality is, it's created lots of unmet expectations and trust issues. So when we go to the homeless and we say, we can actually help you, they don't believe us because they've been burnt so many times before. Out of people who meant well, but they got well in over their heads. Yes, ma'am.
So I was more curious on empowering homeless people. You said that you can put them in a job, and sometimes they fail. So are there efforts towards building skills of individuals? What help do you need in those?
Right. So yes, we do. There are job programs, whether at Star of Hope or at Goodwill. There's lots of different job programs. And for those that legitimately need it, we do get them into that. Those that want it. But our main focus is getting them that income as quickly as possible. And once again, we rely on data again. So we are looking at, I met with an organization, they said, yeah, but we connect people to jobs. Well, connecting is kind of a loaded term, because if I tell you, hey, this place is hiring, that could be a connecting. But that doesn't mean that you actually applied or even got the job. So we care about how many people got the job. We care how many were employed a week later, 2 weeks later, a month, 6 months, and a year. We care about what are they getting paid, what's their wage. So those are all different data points that we track. I'm not telling you that all 500 they're being paid $20 or even $15 an hour. Some of those are going to be part-time jobs. Some are full-time jobs. But the key is just getting that income as quickly as possible. Then they can, because a lot of these people can self-resolve their own homelessness. They just need that income.
So are there efforts towards building skills in these interested individuals?
Yeah, so if you're interested in going into a program, there are programs out there. But that's not the focus of what we do. We'll offer it to them, but our main focus is getting them that employment as quickly as possible. Jeff?
So I'm curious about the Venn diagram of panhandlers and homeless.
Right.
How many panhandlers are homeless and how many homeless are panhandlers? What's that look like? And I also read on Reddit recently, which must be true, that, that they're actually routing panhandlers. And this might not be a homelessness question, or more of a panhandler question, but there seems to be a central location where these people load into a truck and then are dispatched out to highway exits, the panhandler, and are picked up at the end of the day. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so to go backwards on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So there have been cases of organized panhandling. These are, and I'm trying to think, it was the reporter in the Chronicle who recently kind of wrote a story, sort of on it. And we've gotten reports of, especially in West Houston, of vans dropping people off at different corners to work. I can tell you, I've been doing work in the 5th Ward, and I'll be talking to somebody who's panhandling, and then a car drives up real slow and kind of stops, and that person's like, I can't talk to you anymore. And so am I going to say that everybody out there is organized panhandling? No. But I will say some of them are being taken advantage of, and that is definitely out there. Some homeless are panhandlers, and some panhandlers are not homeless. When it comes down to data for this, it's very, very difficult. When you verbally poll individuals, most people who are panhandling will all say they're homeless. Because that's the shtick. That's why, so when you do it on self-reporting, it's very difficult. And that's where it takes trained professionals to ask about 20 different follow-up questions. Okay, well, where'd you stay last night? Oh, you stayed there? But that, and then you can kind of weave the story and really drive down to figure that out. And so it's very difficult. There was a study done in around 2006 where they found that locally half the individuals were not homeless. But I went down to South Main and West Belfort, and there's some very low-income multifamily communities located just 2 blocks away from this intersection. Several of the people told me they live there. They just come there, and this is what they do. The mayor recently announced, surrounded by 90 faith leaders, the Meaningful Change campaign. Its tagline with it is meaningful change, not spare change. And this says, helping those that are less fortunate is good, is great. We're a very caring nation. But instead of giving that dollar out to the person on the street, we would love for you to divert that dollar and give it to the Meaningful Change campaign, to where we can use that collective impact, to where we're talking about if half the region's population ends up doing $1 away from the streets to Meaningful Change campaign, that's $2.5 million in a given year. And we're really talking about that can be money to really house folks. So it's where you know you're going, it's accountable. 100% of the funds will be used for getting folks off the streets. And we can do that because we've received a grant from the foundation to help with the administrative cost. The campaign says everything from there's a better way to give to it's okay not to give to panhandlers. But the truth is this is not an anti-giving campaign. It's just saying let's give in the right way to where we can achieve permanent success and solutions. If a person can get their needs met on the streets, they will continue to stay on the streets. You are getting duped when you give money because not all of them are homeless. And if they are homeless, it's just helping them continue to be there when we really want to offer different alternatives for them. This campaign, there's going to be commercials, there's going to be billboards, there's already 5 billboards up right now. And it's just more of a public awareness campaign for folks to know that there is overlap in the issue of homelessness and panhandling. But they are not the same issue. They are very different issues. The same thing with synthetic marijuana. We call it Kush here in Houston. Kush is a brand name. It's kind of like we now call all cotton swabs Q-tips or tissue papers Kleenex. The brand name was Kush, done for marketing purposes. It's a marketing misnomer. Other places call it K2 or Spice. People is marketed towards those that are vulnerable. So we're talking about the youth into homeless individuals. And while a lot of people on the streets and a lot of homeless people do Kush, a lot of non-homeless people on the streets do Kush. And the sellers like to blend in with the homeless. But if folks feel that folks can hold themselves with homeless, they feel they can get more sympathy. And so, it's a way for people to blend in and to be able to do that stuff. At the end of the day, they're preying on our homeless. And I'll tell you, a lot of our homeless are very upset at it because it gives them a bad name. They don't like getting stereotyped. They don't like being painted with a broad brush, and it does that to them. The new thing now is huffing synthetic industrial solvents. And it's clear, you put it in a water bottle, like you got in front of you, and you have the cap off, and you just snort it. I've seen folks in the middle of the streets with their pants down, not moving, cars going all around them. It can be very dangerous. And I've been to encampment areas where this is going on. Folks across the street are like, we want nothing to do with those people. And the shame is these few people who are the ones passing out and causing all these issues are bringing heat on everybody else. And it's out there explaining that and saying, we got to crack down on those few, bad apples because everybody else is good and getting painted with that unfair broad brush. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier you mentioned that you had some vulnerable that needed care. I was thinking that there's some people that are trained to be nurses or doctors or just personal care and need internships. Maybe having them intern to work with that population.
Yeah, so a lot of that happens right now. So for instance, Healthcare for the Homeless works with Baylor College of Medicine. And it's the medical students that are out there setting those people up with all their referrals and all their office visits and so forth. And they actually intern there at the facilities. So much of it is personal connections. And so it is that day-to-day seeing that same person, knowing that person by name. So it's...
But also the housing that you mentioned too, right? Currently you have people that you're trying to house with home care.
Right. But those individuals, they need even a higher level than just a day-to-day nurse stuff. And sometimes that's easily can be done if they can qualify for medical assistance. But that's a good idea. And we need to look to see whether our providers provide that important tool and to see how they use interns and assistants and other folks to accomplish that. And so we should definitely talk afterwards, and we can do a deeper dive into that. Yes, sir, in the back.
During like extreme weather events, like the floods last year,
Mhm.
did you see like an increase in people coming in or less people coming? Or
We didn't see too much of an impact. Whenever there's an extreme, our outreach teams are mobilized at a high level. So, our outreach teams might be small normally, but we're putting anybody and everybody on them. We're going out and offering services. The shelters open up all their overflow capacity. We open up our community centers to folks, so to make sure that no individual has to be on the streets. But we did not see really any impact with less on the streets or off the streets. Yes, sir.
You make a great pitch to Friendly Sharks. It seems one of the biggest needs here, or the fuel for what you're trying to do, is access to affordable housing and to increase the number of affordable housing. And so far as part of that, if we look at how long it takes to get a housing qualified through the inspection process, is there some effort to look at not only streamlining part of the process to make it easier for property owners to access and engage in that system? And is there some thought of using third parties to verify or to do the inspections?
So I'm going to be frank with you, and the answer is I don't know. That is handled by the housing authorities, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to have somebody like Tori Gonzalez or Mark Feely or even Tom Caslin. So these are folks that used to run housing authorities, and so what you bring up is that if you're using a voucher for a housing unit, that unit has to meet what's called HQS standards, which stands for Housing Quality Standards. So it's the federal government saying, we're not going to allow you to use any of our funds unless the apartments pass housing quality standards. So they have to be inspected. And so they send an inspector down. So the person has to submit an application. So this is what happened recently with the voucher situation. Okay? We had people who had been issued vouchers. They had the voucher in their hand, but they were in various points of the process. And while they were in that process, they got that voucher taken away from them. And so some people had submitted their applications for approval. Some people had gotten their applications back or approved, but they were needing that unit inspected. And some people had had those units inspected, they just hadn't moved in yet and gotten their key, and they got that taken away. So is there opportunities to streamline that process? There might be. But I don't know what cannot be budged on because it's federal requirements, or what definitely can be budged on. I don't know if they can do private inspectors, or they can, but they've done that in the past and they've run into, these are some of the concerns and issues they've worked out there. But that's a good question, and I can put you into working with those right people, and we can look into that.
So we've got 15 minutes left. So what I'd like to do, Mark, if you can stick around for the next 15 minutes or so, if you have more questions, go accost it. Don't actually accost them. But how about a round of applause for Mark?
And I just want to say, I've heard about this going on for years now, and it's grown, and you guys are a force to be reckoned with. Have done amazing, wonderful ideas, wonderful projects. It's all about social good, and I want to thank you guys for what you guys do. Jeff has invited me to this last year, and I wasn't able to come to one of the meetings last year. I know how excited Jesse was and the mayor was at the recent one held at City Hall. And I feel fortunate just to be invited here. So if you don't have time to harass me here, please make sure you get my contact information. I have a couple cards. Love to talk to you whenever you guys do. Thank you once again for being a part of the hackathon.
And we still have pizza, so we eat the pizza too. In case I don't get a chance to say thank you. No, perfect. Lots of